Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar here. Let me get back to my starting page. This is What Can Source Water Do for You? A training for local health department sanitarians. My name is Matt Tomlinson, and I'll be behind the scenes monitoring the technology today. But I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping slides to help you with your navigating experience and participating in this webinar training today. So I want to remind all of our attendees that all lines are muted during the webinar. We are recording this webinar, and so you will receive a follow-up email, and that will have a link to the recording. You can interact with the presenters today, and you can do that by using the Q&A function that's located on your Zoom toolbar. And just open that up, and you can submit your questions and comments, and we will address those at appropriate breaks. Our presenters will be provided with a closeout report for the Q&A. So if we don't get to your question, they can certainly review those and follow up with you directly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tweak, and she's going to do an introduction to this training session. So Tweak, take it away.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, we see you in presentation mode. Take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'd like to first start out by welcoming everyone today. We're excited to have all the participants here, and it looks like we have a very good number of turnout, people attending. Before we get started with the first presentation with Anita, I just wanted to go over a few items, our contact information first, just in case that anytime that you have a question for us, or even a question that you may think of after our presentations today, you are more than welcome to get a hold of us. This information is also on our website. For EGLE Well Construction, you can simply search EGLE Well Construction. Usually the first link that comes up will be our main web page. And on there, the main web page, there is our contact information, and this shows our map of the areas that we cover. Currently, right now, Anita is still with us, and she's not leaving, but she is transitioning over a role with Wellogic more. So if there's any technical questions in Anita's area, please get a hold of Dave. Other than that, I cover the lower half of the state, Rob in the UP, and Kathy is kind of spread throughout in the middle. Another good resource would be the contact information for contamination investigation. This is the map for the coverage areas. Matt Remus, Montana, and Chloe are in that program, in which you'll be hearing from Montana today for his presentation. Another good resource, of course, is your Type 2 information. This is currently the map for the Type 2 program, and is also on our EGLE website. And before we get started with the first presentation, I wanted to kind of showcase and put a plug in for our website. On our main water well construction page, under training resources, there are, if you scroll down to the bottom, under documents and forms, if you click on educational materials, and then once you click on that, under well construction, you can see there's a number of good resources, but what I'd like to showcase today is if you scroll down to health department training videos and click on that, we do have pre-recorded training videos. These are videos we normally do in the fall, but we have a number of videos that are pre-recorded, such as drilling methods, deviations, flowing wells, and also final inspections. I think there's 8 or 9 videos in total. So I just wanted to let everyone know that there are training resources out there and pre-recorded information for you to use at any time. So with that, I will start Anita soon, but again, I want to thank you. And if you have any questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to ask.
Should I turn my camera on? All right. Good morning, everybody. Like Tweak said, I'm Anita. I am work in the source water unit well construction program. I'm also the Wellogic administrator, and I'm going to cover a little bit of Wellogic stuff today and well record stuff. But in general, really hit on the importance of accurate well locations. It's something that we've really put a lot of emphasis on the last, probably within the past year, definitely the past 6 months. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through some of that. Why isn't it? Hold on. Trying to get this to advance to the next screen here, or the next slide for some reason. Huh. Oh, okay. Sorry. Technical difficulty. These are the things I'm going to cover today. Like I said, Wellogic and well record requirements, what's required of the contractors, some information about town range section, lat long, some of the tools that are available not only inside Wellogic, but online. And then we've got EGLE and local health department data uses, the things that we use the data for, and then some projects that we have going on here and some future projects. So what is Wellogic? I hope everybody listening knows what Wellogic is. It's our statewide groundwater database. It's been around since the year 2000. We're pretty much the first state to have such a thing where contractors can submit their well records online. And it's 24 years old. So it's been around quite a long time. You can view all kinds of water well records, drilling records, pump records, plugging records, deepening records, drilling, just test holes. Those are pretty much all the different types of records you can see in Wellogic. As far as what the requirements are for well drillers or well contractors, they just need to submit a complete and accurate well record. It's really simple. It's surprising how many times they can screw that up, but yeah, that's all they need to do. And part of that accuracy is making sure that the well location is accurate. Not only the county, township, town range section, but also the latitude and longitude. Both of those things have to jive with each other to make sure that the well is located accurately. So some of this stuff I'm going to cover is going to be super basic. I mean, really, really basic. But I wasn't sure who all was tuning in, so I just want to keep some simple stuff here in the beginning. Basically, Michigan is just laid out in townships. All you sanitarians know that. Usually you have a certain area townships that you cover. Each township in general has 36 square miles. Usually each township has one set of town range numbers. That's not always the case, but in general, there's usually only one set of town range numbers. And each section is 1 square mile. Now there's exceptions to the rule. Like I said, there's areas all around. These are just some examples up in the UP, townships along lake shores. This is where you start getting in multiple sets of town range numbers for each township. There's French claim areas like down in Monroe County or way up north in Boy Blank Island. Those are just some examples where they don't have town range section. They have long French claim lots. So again, like I said, Michigan's laid out in townships with this survey system where you've got a baseline that runs east and west and a meridian line that runs north and south, and everything north of the baseline, the town numbers are north, have the N, and then south have the south, and the same thing with the range east and west. This intersects down around Ingham and Jackson counties. is where the change is with the north and south and east and west. But in general, this is how each township is laid out. As far as latitude and longitude, we first started requiring those on well records in 2006. Before that, all we had were the quarter sections, which would get us within roughly 10 acres. But oftentimes those were not accurate. And we saw the need, obviously, to have latitude and longitude for mapping purposes and everything else that we use the data for. So anyway, we required this in 2006. And initially it was a struggle. We did trainings with well drillers, show them how to use a GPS unit. That was the thing. Back in 2006, there weren't as many online sources to get latitude and longitudes. It was like you would have a GPS unit or maybe your smartphone, and that was pretty much it. But again, we required it since 2006. It took a while, but we ended up getting everybody on board. So how does GPS work? Just super simple. There's satellites. There's a couple dozen satellites that revolve around the globe all day long, every day. And with your GPS unit, your phone, you can go ahead and get readings off of those satellites, and it tells you exactly where you're at on the globe, the longitude, the latitude, and the longitude. So that's just a very simplified explanation. One of the tough things that we ran into initially when we were requiring lat longs is to try to get the latitude and longitude on the well records in the correct format. This was a big struggle initially. It needed to be in decimal degrees. And what happened was we had a lot of contractors who, again, would use their phone to get the lat long. So that like would default to degrees minutes or degrees minutes seconds. They didn't always go into their phone and change the settings. So what we reported in decimal degrees. So what we would have is like at the bottom shows here, they would collect the data, they would display the data in degrees minutes, but they would enter it in Wellogic like it was decimal degrees. And that did not work. That does not work. But I think for the most part, everybody's in decimal degrees now. But this was a challenge for years for us to get everybody to use decimal degrees. So in Michigan, in general, the latitudes are all in the 40s, 40 something dot and a bunch of numbers, and longitudes are minus 80 dot and a bunch of numbers. But there's a section over way in the west end of the UP, just a little section over there where the longitudes are minus 90. But in general, like I said, it's usually 40s and 80s in Michigan. So some of the tools that we've got inside of Wellogic for contractors to use to make sure they're submitting accurate well locations is there's an alert, basically an error message that pops up. So if they enter the latitude and longitude and click on the check accuracy button, it shows how accurate that is. But before they do that, they'll get an alert and it'll pop up and it'll say, hey, something's wrong here. And then what they can do is they can click on the check lat long accuracy button. And what happens is a map pops up and it shows them on the bottom two things. It'll show this is the county, township, town range section that you said this well was in. And this is where the latitude and longitude put the well. And those two lines should be the same. And I'll show you here in a minute what I'm talking about. But and then they can look at the map. And if the well is not in the correct location, it can be moved right there, updated before the record's even submitted. So there's really no reason why a driller or a contractor, I should say, can't get an accurate lat long location before they even submit the record. We've got, like I said, these tools in Wellogic to do that. We had a report, the coordinate accuracy report, that users could run after the fact and say, you know, I want to look at all the list of well records in my county where the accuracy, where the lat long does not match the county, township, town range section. Well, that report broke. So we don't have that anymore. However, on our end, we can run queries on accuracies and get that out to local health departments if they want to see if there's any records or any wells in their county that aren't in an accurate location. This is the error message that pops up. Basically, it just tells them, hey, the lat long is not in the county, township, town range section that you said it was. So this should be an alert. Now they can still go ahead and submit the record even with this error message, but they do need to fix it before they submit it. And then there's the button that they can click on to check the accuracy. And when they do that, this is what pops up, that map that I talked about. And as you can see at the bottom, it will give them information that says, you know, county, township, town range section. This is what you put on the well record, and the location of the lat long, the map marker, those should be the same. And then, you know, you can zoom in, you can turn the air photos off and on if you want, and also move the map marker and update the location if need be. Here's just an example. You know, if a driller or even local health department, if you're looking at these things, you know, this is just an example of the well is the lat long put the well on the other side of the street. So again, a driller could see this and say, oh, the well's not there. It's on the south side of the street. Go over there, click that location, hit update, and they're good to go. Here's an example of one that's just way off as far as the accuracy goes. As you can see, it's just completely different town range, township, town range, and section. So again, it can be, the point I want to drive home is these can all be easily fixed before the record is submitted, and the drillers need to do that. Yeah, here's an example of the lat long's correct, the township, the section, but the town range is wrong. So this is obviously an area in Allegan County where a particular township, Casco Township, has more than one town range number. So again, if a driller was submitting a record, clicked on the button, saw this, would go, oh, I need to change the town range on the very first data entry screen, and then it would be fixed and everything would be great. Here's an example of, it's just the wrong section number. I mean, it's not always the lat long that's bad. Sometimes it's the wrong section, the wrong town range, even the wrong township. But in this case, it's just, oh yeah, section number's wrong. I need to fix that. This is just an oddball case I thought I'd throw in there. You've got the mobile home park on the right-hand side, but the wells for the mobile home park are in a different county. So you never know what you're going to run into. This one just kind of came to my attention, and I spoke with somebody and they said, oh yeah, the wells are over there, but the mobile home park is in another area. So again, just an oddball thing. This also is an oddball thing we kind of discovered. So in that accuracy map in Wellogic that comes up, it basically put the section line, this red line, that's where the map in Wellogic did. Well, the county parcel viewer for, I think this is Grand Traverse County, the county parcel viewer has the section over here. So it was just something that we noticed that the map was off a little bit on our end. So again, I didn't know this until the health department brought it to my attention. So anyway, yeah, county parcel viewers are great. I use them all the time. And I don't know if you guys encourage your well drillers to use them, but you really should be doing that if they don't use them already. This one, Grand Traverse, is great. Some are better than others. This one is fabulous because you zoom in and you can see the house numbers, which is great. You don't have to click on each individual parcel to get the information. It's all right there. The tax ID number and the address are right there. It's great. I've encouraged some drillers that drill in Grand Traverse County to use this site. Again, if you work in a county that has a parcel viewer online, which almost every county does, I've discovered, you really should encourage your drillers to use this, because obviously then you're going to get more accurate well locations and you won't have to constantly getting after those drillers who don't submit accurate lat longs. So outside of Wellogic, there's some tools, again, that water well contractors, local health department folks, EGLE folks can use. One of them is Google Maps. I use it every day. It's super simple to do. You can enter an address, click the little search icon, and it'll put a dot on the map, or a little orange map marker, red map marker on there. Which is great. You click on that, and then it tells you at the bottom here, gives you the latitude and longitude. So super easy, super easy. Well drillers can do this. Like I said, I encourage them all to do that. You can also do the opposite. You can go ahead and search on a latitude and longitude instead of an address. Click search, and then it'll go ahead and it'll put the map marker on there, and you can say, oh yeah, that's the correct location, or no, wait, it's this house here. So where you can click and then get the updated lat long. So Google Maps is great. It's so simple to use. In-house, we have Water Well Viewer. Water Well Viewer has those same tools. It's just a couple extra clicks, but you can click on the tool icon, the identify. You can click on the map anywhere and say, okay, here's the well, and then it gives you the lat long. So basically the same thing that Google Maps does. And it does the opposite, where you can go ahead and you can click the tool icon, search on the lat long, enter them, click search, and then it shows you where the well is on the map. So both of them work similar, Google Maps and Water Well Viewer. There's other sites you can use, Google Earth and other ones too, but these are the two that I use pretty much every day. So how do we use the data? How does EGLE use the data? How do local health departments use the data? We do a lot of hydrogeo stuff, and my coworker Brock is going to talk about this later in his presentation. But there's always hydrogeo studies and things that are done where the data, the Wellogic data that's available for download is used. It's used for contamination investigations. Again, got to have accurate lat longs, mapping, accurate lat longs. And I'll show you some examples of this here shortly. We also use the data to do contractor enforcement. And the Wellogic data feeds other EGLE applications like the water withdrawal assessment tool and some of those other things. So it's really important that we have accurate lat longs. So, and of course, if we've got Wellogic and we've got a lat long, we can do mapping, and just all kinds of mapping. This is EGLE's website, where we've got umpteen different mapping or web map applications that are out there that anybody can use. And I believe Water Well Viewers out there, probably GeoWebface, probably Environmental Mapper, all those other ones that you guys use when you issue well permits. So there's a whole slew of those out there. These are just some examples of what the data is used for. Obviously, PFAS, sampling residential wells. It's got the information here, and you can click on each individual well, and it'll give you the information on the sampling and that sort of thing. So again, couldn't do this if we didn't have accurate well locations. Same thing with this big big honking TCE plume up in Mansalona and Antrim County. With that data, you know, consultants have been able to, you know, map the plume and where all the wells are and the sample results and everything. Again, it's just crucial that the well locations are accurate. Here's something Kent County used the data for to do some mapping just in this little area with a handful of houses. Again, local health departments use the data just as much as EGLE, and it's really important. Ingham County has a great mapping site of their own, kind of like similar to Water Well Viewer, where you can turn on layers and you can look at all kinds of information. So that's great. We encourage everybody to try to do something like this. It's a fantastic tool. And this is an example of Kalamazoo County. They noticed that there were some higher arsenic and nitrate results in a particular subdivision. So they went ahead and did some mapping, again, got the well record data, the well locations, and were able to map concentrations of arsenic and nitrates. And so again, great use of the Wellogic data. Same thing with well first areas. This one I think is in Washtenaw County. You know, they've got areas that are well first. And again, they wouldn't be able to delineate these areas or really make much sense of anything unless they had accurate well locations that they can then link to water sample results. So super important. And hey, if I can make a map, anybody can. This one I did last week. I got some training from my coworker, how to download the data. This is just a simple map that I did showing all the flowing wells in Gladwin County. Gladwin County has more flowing wells than any of our counties. So I thought, oh, I'll just make a simple map. But you can do this. It's, again, if I can do it, anybody can. It's great to have a visual tool for something like that. And then the super smart people here at EGLE, they have the way or the data to do basically like 3D aquifer mapping. This was all done as part of those dam failures over in Midland and Gladwin counties. But it's, again, a great tool. Can't tell you how important it is to have accurate well locations. You couldn't do any of this without accurate well locations. So EGLE, like I said in the beginning, we've really been concentrating on trying to train local health departments to check the lat long on the well records and train well drillers how to get accurate latitude and longitudes. It's really important. We've had a contract going for several years now with Michigan Geological Survey at the tune of $3 million. And what they are doing is they're entering all the 1999 and older scan well records into Wellogic. And they're also validating the locations of every record that's in Wellogic. So this is a great thing. We've got over 1 million records in Wellogic now. We still have some that, you know, we're always going to have those where they're not in the right location. They'll need fixing. It's just the nature of the beast, but it's really been a great thing. And then we've hired a couple people in our office, Natalie and Isaac, who might be on this training today. They're doing several different things. They're entering the newer paper records in Wellogic. So for you sanitarians where you still have drillers that submit their records on paper, they're entering those into Wellogic. They're fixing locations based on queries run by our information management division. And there's a multitude of other projects. So we're really, really investing a lot of time and money and effort to get accurate locations. We also have coming up starting this year and then probably going into the following year. Oops, I see that says 2024 to 2045. Wow, that's a long project. But anyway, there's going to be a new groundwater or a data management system where all the data from Wellogic and basically all the other divisions that have data for every time a hole is put in the ground, whether it's a geotechnical well or a monitoring well or a cathodic protection hole or whatever, it's all going to be available in one location. So we're pretty excited about that. Looking forward to that coming out. Yeah, a lot of people use the data, tons and tons and tons. I get requests all the time for people that need data and how can I get data? So again, I can't say how important it is to have accurate locations. And yeah, contact the help desk. That's me. That's the best way to get a hold of me is email. It's really not my phone. I mean, email works better. Let's just put it that way. If you need anything done, like a password reset or anything related to well records, just send an email to the Wellogic help desk. And we'll go from there. So I'm just putting in a little plug for our webpage. Tweak talked about this in the beginning. She hit on some things, but yeah, we got a lot of good information on our webpage, tons and tons of stuff. So please check it out if you have a chance. And my last little snippet here is my public service announcement for local health departments. Don't put up with contractors who continually submit late or inaccurate well records. Get after them. You know, and if they continue to submit lousy records or they're late or they don't submit them, let us know and we'll take it to the next level. So the data is too important. We use it for way too many things to have inaccuracies in it. So I believe that's the end of mine. I don't know if there's anything in the chat, guys. Nothing? No questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker. You want to get him going?
Let me just get Montana going a minute. Anytime anyone has any questions, feel free to add them into the chat.
We never saw your face. Never saw your face. Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Montana. I am part of the Contamination Investigation Program. You saw earlier today that I also have coworkers Matt Remus and Chloe Morey. So if you don't recognize my name, maybe you recognize theirs. Our primary responsibilities are to manage contracts to monitor groundwater contamination, specifically in private drinking water wells. So what I wanted to talk with you all today about was taking the proper steps and doing the due diligence to protect your residents and the environment by just making sure when you get well permits in that you are checking for groundwater contamination. And after that, we're going to talk about if you do find it, how you specify well construction in order to safeguard the well, safeguard the public and the environment. So first and foremost, like I said, when you get a well permit in, what you all should be doing is doing a contamination site review. So what that means is you're just ensuring that where this well is located, where the application comes in, that it's not in a site of contamination. And if it is, to dig a little bit deeper into that site and just ensure that if the well can be permitted in the area, how you're able to do that. So you have a bunch of resources here. Anita talked about it a little bit today, Wellogic and the importance of well locations. We have GeoWebFace, which kind of combines Wellogic with Environmental Mapper. And I hope most of you know what Environmental Mapper is. That's what my go-to is. If you get a well permit in, you can just put your address right onto Environmental Mapper, and then it'll show you all the little types of contamination that might be in the area. Other resources are personnel. So myself and drinking water and source water unit here. If you ever have any questions on a particular site, please feel free to talk to us. Then you also have RRD. So that stands for Remediation and Redevelopment Division. That's the division in EGLE that performs all of the contamination site investigations themselves. So that's the district that has all the information regarding BEAs, regarding well monitoring results, etc. As you've seen this before, my area of coverage is Muskegon down to Monroe, up to the Bay Area, and then Matt Remus is the UP in the north, and Chloe is the thumb. So if you have questions regarding a site of contamination, just shoot us an email and we try to get back to you right away. We kind of work as a liaison between local health departments and RRD. So if you aren't able to get a hold of us, if you want to go on the RRD website and maybe contact them, that might be worth a shot. And then, as we stated before, Environmental Mapper is one of my favorite things to do. And just as a reminder, for all well permits that come in, I think that you should be doing this as a first check, just doing that due diligence, making sure that the well that you're permitting is not in an area of well contamination. So as you can see here, you just input an address and then it pops up in the location, and then you have all of these little icons that show you potential sources of contamination. And I wanted to point out as well that this pollutants, you'll notice it says null. Just because it says null doesn't mean that it's not actual contamination. It just is a legacy thing from the old, or sometimes it says null. So if it ever says null, just contact us and then we'll figure out what it is. So on Environmental Mapper, as you saw before, there's plenty of those icons and they all mean different things. They can mean a Part 201 site, which is any site like a waste disposal site, any sort of accidents, anything that's really not a Part 213 site, which Part 213s are underground storage tanks. They also have baseline environmental assessments on Environmental Mapper. So you might see one that says a baseline environmental assessment. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is contamination in the area. It's just that some entity or another has performed a contamination investigation of their own. And sometimes you'll see on Environmental Mapper, or if you click through the links, it'll say that the site is closed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the site is clean. So a closed site just means that an entity that was responsible has done all of the work that they could to mitigate hazards to the public and the environment, but it could still mean that the soil or the groundwater in the area has contamination present. It's just not posing a risk to the public. So if you get a well permit in an area that has an old closed site from 20, 30 years ago, you should definitely check more into that and dig a little bit deeper just to see what it really means. So now that I've talked with you about the due diligence of just making sure that a well application is not in an area of groundwater contamination, it's time to get into the nitty gritty about, well, if I do see that it's in an area of contamination, what do I do? So the first thing you would want to do, and again, reaching out to myself or our RD will help answer a lot of these questions if you can't find them yourselves. But you gotta just ask yourself, what is the type of contaminant? The type of contaminant will determine how you specify the materials that are used. For example, if you have VOCs from a leaking underground storage tank, you're not going to want to use PVC casing because that tends to degrade in oil. So you would want to use steel casing instead, and opposite for high chlorides. So if the water is salty, high sodium or chlorides, that tends to degrade a little bit faster with steel casing, so you'd want to use PVC. The concentration of the contaminant as well. You'll see a lot of times in these BEAs and site investigations that they'll list concentrations. Sometimes they'll be below MCLs, maximum contaminant loads, which is what we use as kind of our threshold for what's safe and what's not in terms of drinking water. And if you see that concentrations over a decade or so have all maintained being below MCLs, well, you might be able to permit a well in the area still. And then distribution of the contaminant. Do we have a delineated plume or do we not? And other things to consider would be groundwater flow and subsurface materials. So if you go on some of these tools that were listed before, you might see wellhead protection areas, or you might reach out to one of us like Travis to see what the groundwater flow is. And that's important to know because you might be right next to a site of contamination, but if the groundwater is flowing away from the well permit, well application location, well, it might be safe to just permit regularly. And then the use of the proposed well, is it a large type 2 or type 1 well, or is it a private well that won't be withdrawing a lot? And one thing to know as well is just because you can issue deviations, just because you get a well application in an area and you can specify steel casing, things you want to consider first are ensuring that you have potable water and it's not in the contamination area itself. So sometimes, let's say you're in an area where there's a local ordinance, if there's municipal water in the area, but somebody applies for a well, they might have an ordinance that say they have to connect to the municipal water. Is there an area, do they live on a large property? Are they a homestead with about 15 acres? And maybe where they want the well to be isn't safe, but you can go 200 feet away without requiring additional specifications. And then also well depth, special construction, as I was mentioning, and just try to stay up gradient whenever possible. So let's say a deviation is required. Let's say there's a well failure and we have to replace the well, but there is nowhere to specify in terms of getting out of a site of contamination. So what do you consider? If there is no safe place to put a well, you consider casing material. As I mentioned before, the contaminant class itself will determine that. If it's VOC, you might use steel. If it's chlorides, you might use plastic. And then we also have other things like PFAS these days, which there's not as much information regarding what materials to use. So just come to us. You got to do your homework a little bit. Depth considerations is the contamination shallow or is it a little bit deeper in the aquifer? Should you permit the well and specify that it be shallow, or do you specify that it goes under a certain depth? Type of grout. We tend to require neat cement in areas of groundwater contamination because that will prevent cross-contamination a little bit better. And K-copper service lines are important if it's a shallow water table and there's contamination in the area. We don't want PVC to be degraded. So now that I've kind of ran through pretty quickly the initial steps when you get an application and why it's important to make sure and ensure that it's not in an area of groundwater contamination. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes, for example, in this first case study, the well at this residence was sampled for VOC, and we found elevated levels of TCE. So according to the Safe Water Drinking Act, it violated the maximum contaminant load, and so we needed to replace the well. And this is the property in question right here. And after a little bit of research, it was discovered that this home right here was a potential source. There was a historic underground storage tank at this location, and their well was replaced due to VOC and TCE. And then this home right here did not have a detection of VOC, and based on well logs, it was found out to be a lot deeper. And then the well that had the TCE was 38 feet deep. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. So as I mentioned before on environmental mapper, let's say that home, we weren't replacing the well because of the TCE. It was just a run-of-the-mill replacement application just because their well had failed. If you hadn't gone on contaminated or environmental mapper or looked up to see if there was a site of contamination, you might have just issued the well permit normally. But if you go on environmental mapper, you'll see the area right here had a historical site, Fowlerville Road TCE. So you might want to do a little bit more homework. You'll notice also that it says null. I mentioned that before. Just because it says null for pollutants doesn't mean that there is no pollution. It just means you probably should be digging a little bit deeper. And another thing to consider, remember, was depth of a well before replacing. This is the well that had the TCE. You'll notice that it was pretty shallow, 40 feet deep about, with a confining clay layer. And then the neighboring well, as I had mentioned, was 200 feet with a few confining clay layers. So in your mind, you should know, okay, it sounds like deeper has potable water and the shallow is contaminated. So what now? Well, you think about the contamination. As I mentioned, it's TCE, which is a volatile organic compound. And you're going through the shallower contaminated aquifer. So you're gonna need to specify well casing that can stand up to the VOC itself. So in this case, we require steel casing with neat cement to ensure that there's no cross contamination as we go deeper into the aquifers. And then we also have to worry about the location. Just because we know water is potable deeper doesn't mean that you can just permit the well anywhere. You still want to try to avoid the contamination as much as you possibly can. As you can see, this lot is kind of small. The existing well with the TCE hit was right in the front yard. And if you remember, the source of the TCE was up to the northeast. So it's kind of difficult in this case to ensure that you're completely out of the plume. But as you can see, the proposed well location was as side gradient as we possibly could. So as mentioned, with the well specs, because it was TCE, we used steel casing and neat cement, a K-copper service line because the contamination was a little shallow, and we attempted for greater isolation from the plume with that well location. And this is the replacement well log. So as you can see, we went deep through clay and it was successful. We achieved potable water, and I think we can be comfortable knowing that that well will be safe going into the future. So here's the second case study. It's in a way polar opposite of the one that I just went over. So in this case, there was high sodium and chloride. And based on well sample results, the contamination was from the deep aquifer. So it was it's our job to determine, well, can we go in the shallow aquifer? You look at the well logs and review samples and permit accordingly. Going back to this schematic, it was a difficult well replacement though, because you can see these lot lines are really small. It's on a lake, and many of the wells in the area are flowing wells. So it was determined to do the proposed well location next to a neighboring well. So this neighboring well was a little shallower. It did not have chlorides. And that's honestly, I guess, like it's the best bet. A lot of these are difficult because you can see there's power lines in the way, the lake right there, septic tank in the front yard. So you can just do the best that you can. And in this case, we used PVC because remember it was chlorides. And even with the best shot, the replacement attempt was a failure, which does happen. So it was a dry hole, and I'm not sure if they've attempted it again. And I just wanted, this is a good example of just a tough scenario. And then the final case study that I wanted to talk about was double casing. It's a relatively newer well drilling technique, at least for our program. And as you can see, double casing is when you have a larger outer casing that goes down to a confining clay layer. Then you set the outer casing, and then you drill a smaller radius casing through the outer casing. And the point of that is to ensure that there's no cross contamination between aquifers. So double casing has its specific uses, and it's not necessarily appropriate in all instances. So talking about when to use double casing, you must know the subsurface geology. So just because you know the current well is shallow and has contamination, it doesn't mean that there's even an aquifer deeper. It doesn't mean that there'd be a confining clay layer deeper. And it doesn't mean that deeper water is potable, if there is any. You can use well logs, they might be adequate. And as Anita was saying, they're actually becoming a lot more helpful than they used to be. You use double casing when the shallow aquifer is contaminated, but you know the deeper aquifer has potable water. But most importantly, there's a proven and consistent confining clay layer. Because remember, you set the outer casing into that confining clay layer just to ensure that there's no cross contamination between aquifers. And finally, if you, and in your programs, if you're talking about requiring double casing, I think it's important to know of well drillers in your area that also know how to do it. It's a little bit more technical, and some well drillers might not even be willing to. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, in the case where our program used double casing, it was actually Kent County that required it, which is okay. But it was state funded. And the requirements were met for a variety of reasons. In Northern Kent County, there's a large investigation into PFAS. So we had a really great understanding of the geologic conditions. The well sampling from across the street had showed that there was potable water in deeper wells. And as stated, the well logs and the geologic investigations did show a consistent clay layer. And we bid this project to multiple drillers, so we knew that one was able and willing to do a double cased well. And as you can see, this casing is pretty huge. I think it was a foot in diameter. We used steel outer casing because, oh, I forgot to mention, the contaminants of concern were basically everything. There was a disposal site, and we had PFAS metals, VOCs, just not great water there. So we required steel casing, and then we allowed for PVC on the inner casing because it should be protected with that outer casing. So VOCs and everything weren't a concern. We drilled a confining layer, which we knew how deep it was based on well records and the geologic survey. But it still took 2 tries. You know how geology works. You never, just because it seems like there's a consistent clay layer doesn't mean that that's always the case. So we accidentally drilled through it and had to fill the foot in diameter hole that was 100 feet deep with neat cement and come back and try again later. But the second time we were able to do it, waited 48 hours to the cement to set, and then drilled the PVC through, and it turned out to be a success. So ran through that pretty quickly. But I guess what I want you to take away from this is, first and foremost, always do your due diligence and check for contamination when you get a well permit in. And then from there, as you get more experience with well permitting and construction, it will become more straightforward and you'll know what to do. But always reach out to us if you have questions. Oh. So Sarah, you have, I don't see hands on here. So I heard Sarah, you have your hand up with a question.
I do. Thank you,
Okay.
Montana.
Yep.
I just want to make a point of clarification on the baseline environmental assessments. A baseline environmental assessment, if it's completed for a property, that means that there is contamination discovered on that property. And that's one of the ways a 201 or a 213 property is discovered, is by that contamination. So you do need to take a BEA as an indicator that there is contamination on that property, and it could be on surrounding properties. A BEA does not necessarily have the extent of contamination delineated. All they need to do is document that there is contamination on that property, and they don't go to the expense of delineating. So just ask that, as Montana said, do your due diligence and checking out the contamination in the area. And a BEA is just the way that a 201 or a 213 facility might be identified.
Yeah, thank you, Claire or Sarah, for that clarification. I know I when I brought it up, I might have said just because there's a BEA doesn't mean that you need to do anything. But what I should have said is look into the BEA to see what's there to know if you have to do anything. Because sometimes it's soil. Yeah. All right, so that does it for me, unless there's any questions.
You're muted, Dave. Still muted.
Technology, I tell you.
We hear you now.
Okay, we'll get this right. My name is Dave DeYoung. I'm the water well construction specialist for EGLE. My contact information here, phone number, email address, on the screen in case there's any questions today about the presentation or the downhole camera in general. Today's topic really does line up well with kind of our theme here. What can source water do for you? I'm going to be talking a little bit about our downhole cameras. You can see by the topic here. I'm going to be running through basically three areas. One, kind of talking about the capabilities of the camera. Number two, if you guys think you're in a situation at the health department where you think you might have a use for the downhole camera, how we can make that happen together. And then basically some of the experiences that we've gone through over the last 8 years in using the downhole camera and kind of showing some practical examples. So I'm going to see if I can advance to the next slide here. Okay. Basically, the questions asked, why did we buy a downhole camera? Well, the main reason really is well, to be honest with you, we had another camera before this one, but it was basically at the end of its life. We were constantly using dielectric compound on all the connections, trying to get the video to work and the light to work, and the reel wouldn't work, and the only way we could record anything was on a VHS tape. Like I said, it had kind of reached its end. So we bought this one. This was kind of the memo we sent out to kind of initially promote it. But as you can see with this camera, it can actually run off a 12-volt battery. Our other one we always had to plug in, which could obviously be a problem if you're way out in the field somewhere. This one can actually fit down a 2-inch well if the conditions are right. It's a pretty tight fit. We've got over 300 feet of reel, so we can get down fairly deep holes. The screen on it is high resolution, really offers up some good pictures, and we can also record on an SD card, so that's nice as well. Some purposes or the main purpose of what we do with the camera. One, obviously, is say in a type 2 scenario, if you're getting, stubborn bacteriological issues and you may think it may be related to some kind of well construction issue, we certainly come out and can help out with that. If you've got a well and you think it may be it needs to be abandoned and plugged, and you have some concern that there may be some fractures that may cause some troubles for absorbing all the neat cement, we can come out and take a look and see where those may be at. And also we can use it in the instance where we may have to do some enforcement work against a contractor. I know Tweak kind of went over this map. I'm just going to kind of touch on it briefly again. The people you're going to initially contact, if it's a private or type 3 well, would be Rob in the UP. And you can kind of see how the lower peninsula split up here with Tweak kind of handling the lower end. And then Kathy and Anita's areas are kind of spread out for the rest of the lower peninsula. With Anita kind of transitioning to her new role, if there are any kind of downhole camera, if you'd like to see the downhole camera come out in Anita's area, feel free to just get a hold of me directly. If it is a type 2 well, as far as an installation that you'd like to see the downhole camera at, these would be your contacts. I believe right now it looks like there was 8 people in place from an analyst perspective. I know Scott Konzerski's took on a different job here, and they're going to be replacing him, and I think they're also going to be bringing some other additional people on. But this map's also available at the EGLE's Type 2 programs website. So these would be your initial contact for a Type 2. So kind of starting the conversation here, we like to kind of hand this form out. Basically this is something that isn't available on our website or at the Type 2 website, so you would have to contact us to get this form. But we'd like to see it filled out not only by just the health department, but with the homeowner and the well driller that's involved. Basically, why we like to have this form filled out is to make sure that the downhole camera is the next step that you should be taking as far as, or we should be taking and coming out there and taking a look at the well. There may be some additional things that could be looked at and some things that could solve a bacteriological issue without the camera coming out. There's 3 categories basically that's covered on the check sheet. The first one is well construction. Some of the questions that would be asked or that we were asking, was the entire service line replaced? Was the filter pack disinfected? Was the old well plugged? You know, maybe there's an old well nearby that's got a bunch of crud in it and causing problems in the aquifer and potentially in the new well. Second category would be disinfection. When the well was disinfected, whether it be once or multiple times, was it done in a simple way? Was bulk disinfection used? Was the solution pH adjusted? What was the concentration? If it was bulk displaced, what was the concentration that was used? And also, was that solution pumped all the way to the bottom of the well, say if it was a bedrock well? In our last area we kind of talk about is sampling. Who took the samples? Was it the homeowner? Was it the health department? Was it the driller? Where were the samples taken? Was it at a kitchen sink where maybe we're looking at a distribution problem or plumbing problem? And also, is there any kind of dead-end plumbing, galvanized piping that may be causing some bacteriological issues? And also where the treatment systems bypass. So a lot of questions. I realize it takes a little bit of time to fill out this form, but there's other things that could be looked at before the camera comes out. We definitely want to look at those things first. So we get to the point where we think the downhole camera is the next step. Basically, the way it works is the owner agrees to hire the contractor, which they would have to do at their own expense. The contractor would pull the pump and disinfect afterwards. We ask that they actually pull the pump at least 24 hours before we come out. There's been some instances where I've gone out to wells where there's quite a bit of sediment and material and debris in the well, and it just looks like pea soup, and we're just not able to see anything. So we want to give the well some time to settle out before we get there. If a recording is desired, like I said, SD card, it can be done on an SD card. We ask that either if the health department wants it recorded or the homeowner want it recorded, that they would provide the SD card. If we do end up recording it, there is specific software from the camera maker that you have to use for viewing. Typically, we just meet on site, but there are instances where if there are some sensitivities, we can meet at the health department office beforehand before we head out. Now I'm going to kind of run into some examples that we've kind of gone through over the past year. This example here, I always like this picture because, we're out there with the camera, the driller's out there, the homeowner's out there, the health department's out there, all trying to come up with a solution on the issue here. This one in particular is just a stubborn bacteriological issue. They didn't end up replacing the entire service line because it went under the sidewalk and such. And we kind of suspected that was going to be the issue. When we went out, got the downhole camera, didn't see anything really kind of until we got down into the screen area. You can see, and I'm going to use my mouse here on the screen, this material here. It almost looks like great stuff foam. Once I kind of got a closer look at it and talked to the driller, they were using such a high concentration of chlorinated solution that I was actually turning the glue a different color. So I thought that was interesting. You can kind of see the screen here. I kind of put this here for resolution. This is a stainless steel slotted screen. When we kind of started looking at it, we could still kind of see some drilling fluid and some other things up and behind the screen. It didn't really look like the well had been developed real well. So that was our recommendation for them to come out and kind of surge the well. And I know they actually, I think, used a chemical treatment as well to get some of that drilling fluid out from in the formation. And if I remember correctly, that ended up solving the issue. Second one I want to go over here This was actually a DNR campground. The campground was having all kinds of bacteriological issues at this well. It was a well that had a hand pump on it. The driller had come out and they had scrubbed the sides of the casing. They had said that they had blown out the well from the bottom with air and that they had injected disinfection fluid all the way to the bottom into the screen, and they were still getting bacteriological issues. So we decided we would come out and take a look. Got everything, the hand pump and all the materials associated with the hand pump out of the well. Started going down this one, and we got down to about 40, as you can see up here, about 47 feet in the well. We ended up running into a riser pipe, or basically the main pipe that would be associated with a hand pump. So what actually happened here is there was actually the entire apparatus, not what was actively being used, but an entire hand pump assembly had been dropped down the well. So, that's kind of what we're witnessing here. You can see the connecting rod and probably some cylinder parts as well. So with these parts in the well, it's really difficult to think that the driller was able to scrub all the way down to the bottom, disinfect to the bottom, blow out to the bottom. So we stated that, they really needed to fish these materials out and kind of try what was done before, but actually getting to total depth to try and clear up this bacteriological issue. I believe they ended up just plugging this well and drilling another one instead. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one. This was actually a well that was drilled through our contamination investigation program. The well actually, after it was installed, was having some problems, the pump constantly running, and they were getting some sand. The driller had come out and kind of adjusted around the pitless adapter to make sure that pump had a good seal at the, so water wasn't kind of leaking down the well. And also blew the well out as well to try and get any sand or debris out of the bottom. You can kind of see here on this picture where the pitless adapter really wasn't seated that well, where water was kind of leaking out the side initially. Also, I kind of wanted to show this was a steel well, and you can kind of see the resolution we can get with this camera with the threads. Pretty incredible picture there. And then once we did get to the bottom, you could see there really wasn't any debris or sediment left in there. Come to find out, the pressure tank, when this well had been developed the first time, did produce a little bit of sand, and it kind of filled up the pressure tank. And once that pressure tank had kind of been cleaned out, the sand problem ended up going away. All right, we're going to move on to our next one here. There's a homeowner whose well had been struck by lightning, and the pump had stopped working completely. The contractor went out and replaced the pump. Once the pump was in place, there was all kinds of cloudy water and grit. And I think, when we talked to the contractor at the time, they kind of knew that most likely the lightning strike had destroyed or did some damage to the plastic casing, but we weren't sure, and they weren't sure how much and at what depth it had occurred. This well was in a really difficult location to replace as well. So we ended up coming out with a downhole camera, and we're kind of hoping that maybe the top joint or maybe a piece real close to the top maybe had fractured. You can kind of see we got down to a point here at about 16, 17 feet, and you can see that the entire bell and spigot portion of the casing, you can see the inner and the outer where they were glued together here, completely exploded. This said also, as we continued down into the well, it didn't stop. Just about every joint we witnessed from here on down had been completely blown out. So we did kind of a side view as well, which we can do with the downhole camera. Some interesting things we saw. You can actually see they didn't extract the grout tube when they did the initial installation of the well. And this was actually, you can actually see it on the outside of the casing here. And also you can see grout and soil that's outside that casing joint in a side view as well. This well ended up getting plugged and another well getting drilled. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one either, but it was just kind of an interesting view here. This was a bacteriological issue as well. We used the downhole camera. We ended up getting down into the screen area, and we ended up the screen. You don't see this as often as you used to, but actually had a bridge in it. The bridge can be used to, basically put it in place or potentially even pull it out when the screen could be potentially replaced. Okay, next site here. This one's in Iosco County. It was a pizza place. Basically, the well was installed in 2013, and they didn't really have any problems until about 2021, I believe. And they were getting some pretty bad bacteriological samples. So restaurant was on bottled water and such, and driller came out. They blew everything out from the bottom. It was a screened well, disinfected, and the problem seemed to go away for about a year. They did a pressure tank replacement and a sample tap, and the problem ended up coming back again. So we decided we'd come out there with a downhole camera. So went down to the first joint. You can see on my mouse here, you can see all kinds of staining, iron staining at that first joint. And then as we passed it, you can see it all, basically that shallow water, which had fairly poor water quality with iron, was basically running through that joint, which wasn't sealed with the glue, and running down into the well. So all that shallow groundwater was getting into the well, causing bacteriological problems. This one I actually found out recently on what they actually ended up doing here. They ended up doing some excavating and pressure grouting around the outside of this casing with grout material, trying to seal up this joint so that nothing would end up getting through anymore. And to my knowledge, unless I hear otherwise, that has worked up to this point. This is another example here at a campground where they had a hand pump. As you know, hand pumps don't necessarily get a lot of use. This example in particular had a bacteriological issue. I can't really say we had the big smoking gun here as far as something that we could point at and say, oh yeah, that was a big time problem. But when you take a look at the casing here, you can kind of see some of this calcification on the side here, kind of build up. You can also see on the screen, there's some iron or iron bacteria, great places to harbor bacteria and for bacteriological growth. Our recommendation to the campground was, with the water quality issues that they've got here and the general lack of use, they might have to actually develop this year every year and disinfect it to keep it free. So that pretty much wrapped that one up as well. This one's just more of an equipment slide, or and I'm not sure how many people participants wise are aware of spool pitless units, but I thought I'd kind of show it here with the mouse here. I'll kind of give an example of how this kind of works. Basically, the casing will come up through the ground and it's glued on to the bottom here. And then another piece of casing comes down into this slot here and gets glued on. And then basically this device here, the drop pipe comes up through the bottom and attaches down to this area down below. These spool pitlesses are used a lot in flowing wells. Then another pipe gets attached to the top, and then that pipe is typically attached to the sides of the casing to kind of hold this piece of the spool pitless down. So basically this would slide down into this material, and these O-rings would basically hold the water from that flowing well from coming up into this little area where the water is going to get extracted through the pump and through this hole here, basically an equivalent to the going out to the service line. and then the upper one would stop the water from coming up the casing. So anyways, using the downhole camera, you can kind of see the discharge piping here off to the side view, and also the top view of where that gasket seats here at the top. So basically some nice pictures here of some equipment we don't typically see a lot. Okay, I'm going to see if I can get this video to play here. This was actually a well. Lady complained she had, I believe she had 7 times she had positive bacteriological samples come in. The well, basically every time there was a big rain out event or a snow melt, the bacteriologicals came along with some cloudy water. You know, they had tried a number of different things like disinfection and replacing the pressure tank, and nothing was really working. Well, Kathy and I showed up on site, and we took the well cap off, and we looked down into the well to kind of see where the static was, and you could see this waterfall effect on the water itself, and we knew something was wrong already. I'll show that again. So didn't take long. We were only in the well, probably 3 or 4 feet here, as you can see, and on this picture, there's this protrusion that's basically coming out or jutting out a casing piece inside into the well. When we look at it from a side angle, you can see that it's just basically the casing is basically bent out, and there's a hole right behind this here. So, and then you can kind of see the very poor water quality and water ending up getting into the well from 3 feet here. So what we deducted is that, you know, this was a new build and that most likely the well, you know, when it was installed, probably got schmucked or hit by a piece of equipment, and it kind of bent or cracked the casing, you know, causing this to happen in the subsurface. As you can see, as we continue to move down the casing, you can see all this heavy staining all the way until we get to this water level. One thing I did want to show is, you know, sometimes we get questions and we say, you know, when you know, submersible pump, you know, gets into well that's not exactly the straightest well in the world, you know, does that submersible pump running all the time ever cause any problems with the PVC? And you can kind of see in the casing here, kind of these rub marks from the submersible pump just kind of wearing on the side of the casing. Obviously hasn't wore a hole through it, but that was an interesting to show as well. And this is the last one I'm going to show. This is actually in Muskegon County. This was an example where the homeowner had contacted the health department and had stated that there were worms inside of his well. We certainly didn't see any worms at all, and actually the well was in very good condition from what we could tell overall. But it did have a different kind of screen in it. It had a wire wrap screen as opposed to the slotted screens you typically see. So basically they take a piece of PVC casing, and they essentially, how this would be done as opposed to the slotted where they're just cutting the slots. They would drill holes in the casing, and then behind it, they would wrap basically wire round material. Like for this, it's plastic. So these pieces would all be solvent welded together in a certain slot size. This can also be done with stainless steel. These screens typically are a little bit more expensive, but they have a tendency not to really plug up as fast, and they can also produce under some conditions more water than your standard slotted screen. So anyways, just kind of wanted to show you know, that as an example too of a piece of equipment we don't necessarily get to see all the time. Just want this, I can honestly say I did not take this picture, but at the same time I did want to show it just to the effect that you know, you can't disinfect your way out of anything. If the source is bad and the source has an issue, It really doesn't matter what you do from a disinfection perspective. So just keep that in mind. And lastly, I just want to let you know, doesn't matter if it's raining, shining, or snowing. You know, if we've been out under all conditions, so we're more than willing to come out and help you guys out as far as using the downhole camera and diagnosing some problems. And that's going to be it for me. And I think at this point, I believe we're going to be headed for a 10-minute break. So 10:35, we'll
All right, I'll put a little timer up there so everybody will have a reminder of that. And yeah, we'll see you back at 10:35.
Thank you.
You ready to start, Matt?
Yeah, take it away.
Hey, I'm Kathy Gardner and I'm with the Well Construction Program here in Lansing. I've been here 10 years. And we're going to do a quick presentation, or I am, on the minimum program requirements. And these are specific to the private and type 3 well program. So let's go ahead and get started. When you see us, either myself, Anita, or Tweak, when we head over and pop in at your health department, normally that's why we're there. We're doing our annual evaluation to look at the program MPRs. In some cases, health departments do a self-assessment. So somebody at your office may be doing pretty much the same things we do. All right. So the MPRs were established to mimic the other accreditation programs. And they were established through DHHS. We can see the dates here when things happened. Basically, all our programs are tied to the public health code, which is Act 368, which was established in 1978. And we're going to talk about what sanitarians need to know. Basically, they were established for the P3 program to create consistency throughout the state with implementation of Part 127. Mainly, we want to clarify and standardize what a well final inspection looks like. So we're going to jump into some of that. And of course, the funding stream is what dictates part of what we're looking at here. When government gives away money, we always want to know where it goes and are we getting our money's worth. So here's the two pieces of money that most health departments get. You get your EGLE annual grant, which covers the other health programs. And then the DHHS contract covers the on-site wastewater, which is part of accreditation, and then the private and type 3 water supply program. Within the MPRs for our program, data is collected regarding the number of permits issued, number of wells drilled, number of wells inspected, and some other particular items. So we're going to jump in and look at some of those things. And of course, we have a manual. Our guidance manual is available on our website. Whether you're doing self-assessment or we're doing a standard assessment, this is what guides what we're doing. What's in the manual? Obviously, evaluation criteria, information on type 3 water supplies. If you're doing a self-assessment, the directions and information. There's example forms. We have a complaint form, a deviation form, a pre-drilling site evaluation checklist, and a random construction checklist. There's information on enforcement procedures when we have contractors with issues, and then contamination guidance. And within the MPRs, you're going to see where it draws together what Anita talked about, which is accurate well records, and what Montana talked about, which is information for issuing permits in areas of contamination. So there are guidelines for what's required when we do that. So MPRs 5 through 7 are what we look at for the private and type 3 well program. And NPR 5 covers well record review. NPR 6 covers permits and inspections, so issuance of your permits. And NPR 7 covers investigation of water quality issues, health advisory letters, and groundwater contamination. So let's look at NPR 5 a little bit, and that's the discussion about the health department must have a process to retrieve and review well records. Obviously, we want those looked at for timeliness, completeness, and accuracy. And then this addresses documentation of enforcement actions to the contractors with regards to the well records. And obviously, this has a big asterisk on it because we don't want the health department to become the fixer of bad information on well records. So while you can fix deficiencies, and you can do that via phone call or email, we don't want you to become the person that's always fixing well records for contractors. NPR 6 is loaded with lots of things because it addresses well permits and final inspection. So within this NPR, you must have a local ordinance that requires a well permit. Within that, the applicant must submit a site plan. The health department must do a pre-drilling site evaluation for every site. And that includes looking at water well records, deed restrictions or land use, and sources of contamination. And then all newly completed wells must have one on-site evaluation prior to, during, or after construction. Within the follow-up, you also want to make sure, any well that needs to be abandoned is addressed on the permit. And this would be the reason why you would jump in and look at Water Well Viewer or the well mapping that Montana talked about through Environmental Mapper. This is the driving force to looking at that. Also addressed in the NPRs are final inspection. And if you notice on the bottom, when we're looking at counting final inspections for the NPRs, an outside only inspection is not a final inspection. It's defined within the NPRs what a complete final inspection is. And that includes ensuring adequate separation from contamination sources, looking at the casing termination and well cap, making sure the annular space is sealed, looking at the well components to make sure they're all on the EGLE approved well component list, and then popping inside to take a look at the pressure tank and that piping, sample tap, valves, and controls. And then you want to confirm that abandonment is done where it's required. And obviously, a minimum of 10% of newly completed wells need to have a full final inspection. And this is calculated per fiscal year. And then most health departments have a checklist of what you need to do at a final inspection or policy. Final inspection also, NPR 6 also includes the language that's used to either approve or not approve a well after meeting the minimum criteria. So minimum criteria that should be met before approving a well includes a safe coliform sample, assurance that the permit conditions were met, and then we want a complete and accurate well record and a complete final inspection. Within NPR 6 is the statement that well owners need to be notified of the need to obtain a safe BACT sample before water use. Most health departments have this on their issued well permit. It's part of the language. And then we want notification is required when you have a positive bacteria result. And then approvals and non-approvals are issued in writing. NPR 6 also touches on deviations, and that deviations must be properly documented and issued as required under Part 127. And abandoned wells and dry holes must be properly documented. Well code violations are identified and followed up, and this is where we look at well construction code violations. Previously, it addressed well code violations that are on the well record. This is particular with construction. The LHD must also follow up on water quality complaints by customers, and y'all are the first line for this, so, and document your findings. NPR 7 addresses groundwater contamination. And under this NPR, we address that the health department is going to assist us in investigation of drinking water contamination. And you're going to investigate complaints regarding bacteria issues, man-made chemicals, heavy metals, nitrates, turbidity, taste, and odor. You know, we've also often asked the LHD to head out and look at a well that possibly may be producing silt, grab a sample, talk to a well owner if they've contacted us first. Normally, well owners contact the health department first. And of course, we're here to head out with you, answer questions, talk to well owners the best we can to help them figure out what's going on. NPR 7 addresses the health advisory letters. This is where this is at. And in Michigan, the main ones that are sent out are for uranium, which is the Upper Peninsula, arsenic, and nitrate. So this is the requirement where the local health has to send a health advisory letter. And LHDs must have a policy procedure to address proposed well sites near known or suspected groundwater contamination. And I think Montana hit on this really heavy, that, you know, environmental mapper is the main source for that information. So when we look at NPRs 5, 6, and 7, we have evaluation criteria where it's determined that they were met with conditions or not met. And if they're not met, the health department has to submit a corrective action plan, which could have pictures included. And the most common reasons for not met is that the 10% full final inspection rate is not met. We have to remember that 10% is a minimum and the state average is actually 64%. Another not met is that well replacement sites, there's no follow-up being done if the existing well is not properly abandoned. Documentation needs to be provided. It needs to be clear why a permit condition wasn't met. Well records were not being properly reviewed with follow-up to contractors. They weren't just errors, they were issues with well records that required follow-up regarding construction also. And then health advisory letters weren't being sent when the water exceeded an MCL. Really important to let well owners know, you know, that the water doesn't meet the MCL. And the private and type 3 assessments are done every year. So either someone at your office or myself or Tweak are heading out there to interact and do field visit and do file review every year. Most of you know we're available to help with technical questions and site visits. Feel free to get a hold of us and we will head out with you to do a difficult site evaluation or, you know, do some final inspections if you need to. And of course, this is how you find us, like everyone said. I think Anita was answering some questions in the chat. All right, are we heading to? Yes. So Brock, I believe you are next. If you're available to share your screen.
All righty. Thanks, guys. I'm gonna turn on a little laser pointer here so you can kind of track with me. If you give me a second. All righty. Well, welcome to my section of the presentation. We'll be going through empowering communities through source water training of what the source water unit does here. So what we do, we have a wide range of roles and responsibilities, including review of hydrological or hydrogeological reports, or aquifer tests for large quantity withdrawals, typically greater than 70 gallons per minute. That approximately equates to about 100,000 gallons per day. We review, approve, and update wellhead plan areas and for delineations. Source water assessments for non-transient, non-community type 2 wells. Source water protection. Deviations, variances from isolation distances, which I think this is the general topic that comes up with health departments and our way of helping you guys. And then again, GIS work and support. Quickly, before we jump into the presentation, I kind of like to do a outline so we kind of know where we are, where we're going, and what's going to be presented. Quickly, we'll do a background and some review on hydrogeology and groundwater supplies, typically just to prime the pump, quote unquote, right? Get us thinking of groundwater withdrawals. Ways we, the source water unit, can help. That's the three most common is deviations from isolation distances, like I mentioned earlier, a help with groundwater flow direction and magnitude of hydraulic gradient, which is also very important. Aquifer confinement. So whether we're confined or unconfined, really it's the lithology that dictates this. So whether it's like the permeability and hydraulic conductivity of the materials. We'll go over a quick case study of a type 1 supply that addresses the hydrogeological setting, lithology, and flow, deviations from contamination sources generally, and then soils evaluation and validation. After the case study, we'll jump to the last piece, which is the source water assessment overview, and then give you guys kind of a snapshot of what the online assessment looks like, and a QR code to capture if you wanted to actually open up that. And then lastly, wrap up and questions. So background and review. Let me do this thing. There you go. Okay, so typically there's two general types of water wells that we work with, and it's a matter of whether it's consolidated or unconsolidated. So consolidated would mean you're in a bedrock. So it's not sand, silt, clay, or gravels. Again, the bedrock well could go through what we have listed here as overburden and then saturated overburden, which is your granular unconsolidated material overlaying the bedrock. And then the bedrock it'd be a bedrock well where the screen is placed and you're pulling from typically fractures or wherever water can move between the pore space. And then for the unconsolidated or a drift type well, the screen portion would be within that unconsolidated granular material above any bedrock material. This is kind of nice to show. We have our land surface, and then we have our annular sill kind of for construction purposes. And there's this clay layer that went through, so there's some type of confinement here potentially. And then we get into the sand and gravel of our aquifer. The water table statically sits here in this diagram. And then once it pumps, you get this cone of depression, right? And that drawdown from discharge. There we go. So pumping from water wells leads to drawdown in and around the well. This diagram I really, really like. It was the source is from the Ohio Department of Health. I like it because a lot of times we get confused or when we're talking about whether it's the pumping water level or the drawdown and static, but really this kind of simplifies that whole idea here that in this little subtraction math here, where the pumping level is 60 feet from the surface. But then the static water level was 20 feet from the surface originally. So we would take the 60 minus the 20 to find out how much we actually drew down. And that difference is our drawdown in the 40 feet. So water pumped from wells replaced with groundwater in the surrounding area, right? And that's typically controlled by the transmissivity and the storativity of the aquifer we're looking at. And the transmissivity is simply the hydraulic conductivity times the aquifer thickness. And so the aquifer thickness would be that pumped portion of the aquifer. So not necessarily the entire length of the borehole, but it could be. And then storativity is the volume of water released from storage per unit surface area of the aquifer per unit decline in hydraulic head. So for every foot we go down, for a foot by foot rectangle, you go down a foot, how much of that was discharged? The pumping water level down here, where in this diagram shows, will often stabilize for a particular flow rate. And that equilibrium occurs when the pumping rate equals the inflow rate. And that's very well displayed in like a step test as this. And so this is step test data from an actual site that's actually from the case study that we'll talk about a little bit later. But in step one, right here in this zone, they pumped at 284 gallons per minute. And you can see almost without even trying that it stabilized somewhere in the 43 foot zone. And then if you step up the flow rate, then it's going to draw down some more. And then it finally hits another stabilization value. And then again on the third one. So the step test kind of shows a nice, gradation into that you do go deeper as you pump harder. The three ways we can help, of course, is deviations from isolation distances based on geologic and hydrogeologic factors. The groundwater flow direction and magnitude of hydraulic gradient. So particularly the direction and velocity of the groundwater. So which way is it going? How fast is it going? Both play very key roles here. And then lastly is the confinement or unconfinement. So typically this is, well, it's always controlled by lithology, the permeability and hydraulic conductivity. And so again, the ability for fluids to move through the solid or unconsolidated material dictates whether or not you're going to be in a confined or unconfined. Deviations, what we look for, groundwater flow direction. That's very, very key, because if we're flowing away from the contamination and we're up gradient of it, that's always a benefit versus the opposite of being down gradient of the contamination. Steepness of hydraulic gradient related to transport velocity. So this is critical if we're on like a very flat like a flat static water table, and we pump really hard, or maybe not even that hard, but we get a larger cone of depression, so our reach becomes greater in terms of what we can pull into the well. So if it's a steeper hydraulic gradient and moving faster, our radius of influence down gradient is going to be significantly reduced. And then the porosity, hydraulic conductivity, and permeability. So again, the space between the soil grains. If it's not clear, geology and the space between the grains is very, very critical. Confinement as it relates to soil type, clays versus sands and gravels. So rather than just clays, let's think of it as like fines, because in some scenarios, some silts can actually act as confining units, but typically the clay is by default the confining material. And thickness does matter. You can imagine like having 1 foot versus 100 feet of clay. You're much more confident in its ability to hold back fluid flow through it at 100 feet versus 1 foot. And then evaluate nearby sources of contamination, location relative to proposed well as it relates to all points above. This is groundwater flow direction. This is kind of fun. This is a 3-point problem. This is maybe the simplistic way of actually addressing this without having to use like trig. And it still addresses the groundwater flow direction. It's really, really quick and easy. The ratio is set up as the highest elevation. So if you have 3 points, right? The highest elevation minus your intermediate elevation over the highest elevation minus the lowest elevation should equal some unknown distance, which would be between the highest and the intermediate, divided by the measured distance between the highest and lowest, and I'll show you. So hypothetically, let's pretend we have static water level at or elevation of 20 feet, 200 feet, and then the lowest is 50 feet. Middle market, this other well is 75 feet. We would do what this equation suggests, to take the highest, the 200 minus the middle, 75, divided by the highest minus the lowest, so 200 minus 50, equals this ratio of this measured distance from lowest to highest underneath the unknown distance. And so we solve for this unknown distance by multiplying the left side and the right side by the denominator, and we get an unknown distance measured of 94.6 millimeters in this scenario. And then you would mark that on this line between the highest to the lowest, and then connect these two lines from, these 2 points, the unknown point that we now know, and then the middle elevation value. And then that is what we call an equipotential line. And then groundwater flow would be 90 degrees off of that equipotential line. When we have a lot of them, this is a nice little internal GIS map that shows regionally groundwater flow direction. So it takes into consideration much more than just 3-point problems. Some topography also gets played into this if it's interpolating. But you can see, I have a better one zoomed in here. These arrows, right? And these arrows are pointing as the groundwater would be flowing in these directions. And then the size of the arrow also is a matter of its magnitude. So how fast, like what's its velocity? Is it a higher velocity or lower velocity throughout? And if you have any questions on how to go through 3-point problems, I have documents I can send over and help with that anyway. Aquifer confinement, what we look for is really well logger borne lithology. And this is super key. Like when these get done well and they do a good job at writing down what the lithology is, it makes a huge difference in the confidence in terms of what we can do on our side of the table. And then from those boring logs, we can put some cross sections together showing lateral continuity or not. For the sake of showing that kind of lateral continuity in terms of like addressing maybe a potential site for whether we're looking at confinement or not, and even in terms of like groundwater flow direction. In this scenario, we're not selecting a triangular shape, but a linear shape. So these 3 wells would be selected to see if we have kind of like a continuity in terms of lithology through these. And it also gives us a general one-way path of maybe which way the water is flowing, but only in a linear sense. So we would select 1, 2, and 3, and they get listed over here. And this is through the drinking water JS. We hit submit. And then from that, it populates, it pulls the Wellogic ID and well information and populates them pretty quickly. It's a nice, like quick and dirty way to just really get a quick snapshot at the site. And then you'd need to determine whether or not the logs are correct or if there's any issues with that. But thanks to Anita and her team, that is improving drastically, and it's actually quite nice. So in this description here, it will tell us like whether the yellow is the aquifer, a little triangle would be the static water levels, and then it goes into marginal aquifer, partial confining, or confined material. The partial confined material in this description, I know it's not soils, but it means that it's clay with something else. And the confined material would be really clay. And you can see that there is maybe some clay that transcends across the entire set of these 3 wells. Quickly to show again with both of them together, so you can see that we selected well 1, 2, and 3, and then below here would be the same last figure that we saw to kind of put them into spatial representation with what we have versus depth. This case study is kind of fun. So this is typically what mostly comes in. It's not just we need a flow direction. It's usually there's some type of isolation issue or contamination nearby that needs to be addressed to see if it's still safe to proceed with the well approvals. In this one, we'll look at like TPW5, and this is the property that TPW5 is on. And these are some, call outs that would be approximately, or sorry, adjacent or approximately adjacent, that closest that could be troublesome. From that, we look at these well logs, and again, the important part, well, all of it's important, but the most important part for us in looking at what's going on and whether we're going to be confined, unconfined, transmissivity or fluid flow, and so forth, would be this little section that's now highlighted in red, where we have the borehole depth, diameter, static water level. This one's flowing, right? So what the pumping level was after they did their initial pumping test on it. And then, of course, the formation description with thicknesses. And then the screen, all of this information is really helpful. And a bigger zoom here gives it really nice. So it even gives us our wellhead completion is 12 inches above grade. So, and how many bags of neat cement were used for this. Slotted, this is really, really helpful information. Especially this right here, where we have, brown clay at 6 feet, and then brown clay again, 25 feet at from 94 to 119 feet. And then how all these soils are classified is super important. It's not really necessarily important to know that which one to use, really, other than that there is several. The one that's most typically used in my experience is the USCS and occasionally the USDA soil survey. Primarily what's happening, or how these are all classified, is based upon the grain size of each of these sieves, right? So it's a mesh that shakes, and the total soil shakes out if it's smaller than the sieve size that's it's being spec'd at, and then you will collect and see kind of if it falls between the gravel, the sands, whether it's a coarse sand, a medium sand, or a fine sand, and then into the silt, clays, and so forth. Lastly, this is the type 2 non-transient, non-community groundwater water source water assessments. This is the online assessment that you can click through and fill in the fields that are available to populate, and then it outputs a report for you. The nice thing is it also gives you like a spatial representation of where you're actually at, so you can kind of check to make sure that what you're putting in is like actually spatially representative. And then from the submission of that, you get a nice, neat little report that gets sent out. And these are the first like 6 pages of that. It would be source water, the WISN number, source ID, and all this you fill in that survey. Well records, well construction, geologic sensitivity, and then of course susceptibility determination and so forth. If you would like the QR code or would like to scan that, you could probably pull your smartphone or any device that has the capability of scanning QR codes to link to web page. You can take that survey now if you like, or later. We can send this out as well. But if there's any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Brock. Sorry, just a moment. Reverb. Up next, we will have Brad Laskowski speak on enforcement and the policy and procedures that we have. So, Brad, are you available?
Yep, I'm just getting my,
Okay, we'll give you a second. And at any
PowerPoint
time, if
ready.
anyone has any questions, feel free to place them in, or you can raise your hand. And after, if you think of a question, please feel free to email or call one of us. Thank you.
okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Brad Laskowski. I'm with the Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division's Enforcement Unit. And this is our basic enforcement process as it stands now. So authority, it's important to know where your authority comes from. You don't want to act like Cartman running around with your stick and not actually know where your authority is from. So EGLE's authority comes from the Public Health Code. And we use a couple of provisions from that. Article 1 has our general provisions. It tells us what we're allowed to do and what we can't do. And then Part 127 has the specific regulations to well construction. And then health departments have the same authorities that EGLE does, but also you have any of your local sanitary codes that you have. And then the well code, everybody should have a copy of this, but it contains two parts, the statute or the actual laws by Congress, and then the administrative rules, which are promulgated by EGLE with stakeholder input. MPRs, Kathy went over this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide. And why do contractors violate? We give everybody a code book. They have easy access to the regulations, and it should be pretty simple for people to not violate. But you've got guys that don't understand the code. They can skimp out on some parts of the construction and make more money that way. Lack of a regulator field presence. If you're not out there and they think they can get away with something, being present is a big deterrent. And then you're always going to have the individuals who are anti-government and just don't want to be regulated when they're doing their work. And ignorance of the rules, it's not an excuse, but it's a reason on why violations happen. So the way I try and look at it is orient, educate, assist, and escalate. So when you have a contractor that's violating, point them to the rules, educate them on them, help them try to stay in compliance, and if they just won't, escalate it up. So the enforcement process, this is specific things that must happen per statute. So there must be an investigation, a correction order must be issued, preliminary notice and informal opportunity to show compliance. That would be at EGLE's level, notice of suspension and opportunity for a hearing, and then notice of revocation. So the investigate comes from MCL, which if you don't know, MCL is Michigan Common Law, 333.12709, section 1. And the correction order comes from the same statute. The preliminary notice and informal opportunity to show compliance actually comes from a different set of rules. That is the Administrative Procedures Act that governs what the state is allowed to do when pursuing revocation of somebody's order, or sorry, of somebody's license, or in this case, registration. And then notice of suspension and notice of revocation both fall under MCL 333.12709.2, and that's just EGLE's authority to suspend and revoke the registration. So our enforcement procedure, this is how we implement the process from the last page. So health department actions, if you have a local enforcement policy, awesome. I know not everybody does. I know not everybody has the capability to do that. But if you do, sweet. Baseline state enforcement expectations. So this is, if you're going to refer a case to us, this is kind of what we look for. Did you issue compliance communications and the violation notice? Did you issue any fines? I know this is hit or miss by health department. Not everybody has the authority or support to issue fines at their level. So we can bypass that one if it's not feasible for your health department. An informal hearing joint with EGLE. This is with the well construction program generally and not necessarily with the enforcement staff. You want to talk to them at the health department level. This is kind of a come to Jesus moment, where you lay down all the violations, all the issues, and say, hey, if you don't correct your actions and get back on a path to compliance now, you're gonna be referred to EGLE. And then a local consent agreement. Again, this is an option you have. Not everybody's able to execute it, but that's just a formal document between the health department and the driller, showing a path to compliance. And then finally, referring it up to EGLE. We're currently working on a referral form that you'll be able to send to the program staff for your area. That program staff will review it, and provided there's not any additional actions, they'll send it up to our enforcement unit. And then the one thing I forgot to mention on the health department actions is if you think it's criminal in nature, illegal drilling, they've just gone way outside the regulations and are being egregious, send that up to your program staff immediately. That way we can get a criminal investigation started. So I covered the well construction program staff's actions. So the enforcement unit actions, this is when it gets to my level, or we have a manager or specialist, and we're going to be having 2 more analysts as well. We're going to review the case, kind of do our own brief investigation of the facts, and then we're going to either issue enforcement and violation notice or corrective order. We don't do that very often. That's more based on if there's an event that is significant that we want to sit down and talk to the driller about with the EGLE enforcement level. But at that point, we're not pursuing revocation of their registration. The second option, or the second thing we would do, is a notice of intent to revoke the registration. We have to give them a notice with all the suspected violations or alleged violations. And then we have to provide them an opportunity to show cause. So that's the informal conference or a Rogers conference. And that's just an opportunity for the well driller to sit down with EGLE's enforcement unit and say, I don't believe I violated these things. Here's my evidence. During that conference, we can talk about a consent agreement and enter into a legally binding agreement that has fines and addresses their violations, and it generally puts them on a probation period. Normally we do 4 years, but we can adjust that based on the specifics of the violations. If we don't come to an agreement and they don't show cause that they were in compliance, we would then issue a notice of suspension. And that notice of suspension gives them 30 days to go to the administrative law court and request a contested case. And our enforcement unit at that point would begin building the case file for court. So I'm going to skip number 4 real quick. I'll come back to it. Number 5 is the Attorney General's office for the contested case. When we submit things, or if they file for a contested case, that's in administrative law court in front of an administrative law judge. EGLE will be represented by the Attorney General's office. And the process for that is they get assigned a court date, we present our evidence, call witnesses, take testimony. The other side has the opportunity to do the same thing. The administrative law judge puts out his findings on the case. We have a period of time to file our exceptions to his findings, and then there's a period of time to file the exceptions to the exceptions. And then all of that information gets sent up to the director of EGLE to make a final decision. And that'll either end up in or notice of revocation if we pull the license, or whatever penalty the director of EGLE feels is appropriate. Jumping back to 4, EIS is our environmental investigation section. That'll be anything that you refer that's criminal in nature. We'll put together an evidence package, send a referral over. They'll give us a confirmation of their case number, and then we'll do any follow-up with them or assist as needed. But once it goes to them, it's their case. So roadblocks to effective enforcement. This is especially true at our level when we go to review a case. Lack of documentation. I've had a couple of cases where there's been a problem individual in the area. There's been a request for enforcement assistance, but when we asked for the documentation of violations, what correction orders have gone out, if they have a call log, they weren't able, the health department wasn't able to provide any of that. So then we're starting from ground zero and we say, hey, build your documentation so that we can pursue a case. Failure to set deadlines. This is another big one. If you issue a correction order, always have a compliance date on it. If there isn't a compliance date and we go to meet with them, they always have the argument of, well, I'll get to it. You know, the document didn't contain a deadline, but I do intend to fix it. And at that point, we have to kind of set a concrete deadline. Avoiding enforcement. There's no reason you should avoid enforcement. I know some of these well drillers can be the more aggressive personality, but ultimately you issue out your correction orders, your violation notices, and if they get aggressive or start fighting you on it, you can always ask EGLE for help. Not following a process. If you're going through everything wishy-washy, occasionally kicking out letters, it's hard to track. So make sure you have a process in place so that you can track and keep yourself organized, and you know when it's at a point where they're obviously not complying and you need some assistance. And then when you get to that point, escalate it and ask EGLE for help. Discretion is huge with this. You know, a couple of missed well logs on somebody that drills 200 wells a year isn't super concerning, but once they have a pattern of that, we need to know so that we can look into it. Also, if you suspect they might have a pattern and it's bleeding over into other counties, you can let us know and we can verify that on our end. So enforcement tips, meet contractors where they're at. You know, if you meet them at their sites or their offices, you can bring about better results. They're in a more comfortable environment. It reduces the tension on them. Establish a rapport. You know your area, you know your drillers, you know who's your good drillers are and who your problem ones are. But maintain equity among all the drillers. Don't exceptionally target one person because you know they're a bad driller. Obviously, they're going to have more violation notices if they're a problem child than if they're one of your good drillers. But and then don't let the relationship influence enforcement. If it's a violation, send a violation letter or a correction order. Again, use your discretion on, especially if they reach out to you initially. Open source information. I've had a couple of health departments tell me they don't use social media when they're investigating or to issue a violation, even if they have seen posts on social media. And that kind of befuddles me a little bit. If somebody's going to post their illegal activity out there and kind of flaunt it, I would 100% use that against them. We have issued cease and desists off of Facebook posts. We routinely do that. So if it's out there and it's available, use it. And then utilize EGLE. There's a whole bunch of obstacles that local health departments can face on enforcement actions. Politics, a board that's not supportive, maybe the influence of the driller on some of the board members. If you ask us for help, we can look into it and we can help. And then, like I said earlier, discretion. This is the biggest part of doing enforcement. You know when it becomes a problem, you know what's a minor thing that can get fixed, you know your drillers. So just use your best discretion and your best judgment when you're looking into violations. So kind of to go a little more in depth on EGLE's actions. When we do our case review, we're looking at the totality of circumstances. I generally look at not only the history, but also how many wells they drill a year, how accurate are their logs, things of that nature, so that we, in the health department actions, so that we have a big picture view of what's going on with this case. And then we'll review with program staff and our enforcement unit to kind of determine a path forward. Generally, once we determine a path forward, we'll set up a meeting with the local health departments or send an email saying, hey, this is what we're looking at pursuing, just to keep you guys in the loop on it. And we may occasionally refer to it to other agencies. The Attorney General's office is for all of our court cases, and the EIS section for criminal investigations. EGLE does have a internal memo that we use for monetary penalties. This has been signed and reviewed by the Attorney General's office, but it's from 1998, so it's old, and the violation amounts are not in keeping with current times, but they're tiered at $250, $500, $750, and $1,000 based on the type of violation. And we can dictate whether payments go to the state or to the local health department. I have yet to encounter a situation where we dictated that the money would go to the state. In my experience so far, we've always dictated that the money goes to the local health departments. We are looking at updating this memo to bring the fines more in keeping with current monetary levels. So the Attorney General's involvement, whenever we need legal representation, we get them involved. There's a formal briefing packet we have to fill out and send over that has all the case information. They'll represent us at the contested case hearings. There may be other instances. We may ask for advice on how to proceed with enforcement. We may have some questions related to what the law says and what our authorities are, or if they sue us or they sue the health department, or they sue the state. We use the AG's office as our representing attorney in those dispositions. And then our environmental investigation section, they're all DNR conservation officers, so they have full peace officer authority. They are attached to EGLE, so they don't do any field work. They only work on EGLE's environmental cases. And they are specialized detectives. They go to an extra course to focus on EGLE specific issues. They conduct all of our criminal investigations. They can refer charges to either the Attorney General's office or the local prosecutor. We always try and use the local prosecutor. The Attorney General's office has a pretty significant backlog for criminal cases. So last time I talked to one of our detectives about it, it was 2 years before it would even be seen in front of a judge. So it's tends to be faster if we go to the local prosecutor. But if the local prosecutor is hesitant or is notoriously bad with environmental cases, we can go to the Attorney General's office. And then once a case is referred to EIS, our program doesn't have a lot of involvement in the case. In the court proceedings, once it's the investigator's case, it's out of our hands. They do advocate that the prosecutor reach out to us. It doesn't always happen, but we will reach out and try and keep a finger on the pulse of the case so that we know where it's at and we can provide updates if needed. And then just a quick little enforcement update. We do have a new enforcement unit. So previously it was just me handling the all the environmental health cases that we had. We've actually created a standalone enforcement unit for the Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. We have a new manager, Matt Allen. He came from Ottawa County. And we have Maureen, our specialist, and myself as an analyst. And we just finished up interviews for the 2 additional analysts. So hopefully we'll be able to get them on soon. And we requested a AG's review of the documents and procedures that we do for enforcement. I put on the slide the whole program. It's not the whole program, it's enforcement specific items. So that's ongoing, but almost complete. We're just waiting to tie up some loose ends on a couple of the less used documents. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. If you have any questions, you can always email us, find us on our website. Again, there are a number of really good resources online. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.